The Lewis machine gun was one of the most feared weapons of the First World War. It faced down armies across the Western Front, changing the face of modern warfare. But in 1932, this legendary weapon met its match in the Australian outback. Its opponent wasn't another army, but a 2-meter-tall, flightless bird. What followed was not a simple cull, but a bizarre and humiliating chapter of military history that would become known as the Great Emu War. Hey, I'm Michael, and welcome to Hoodie History. Now, the story of soldiers fighting birds sounds like a comedy sketch, and trust me, there are parts of this story that are genuinely hilarious. But the real history behind the Great Emu War is much deeper than that. It's a story born from the desperation of the Great Depression, the broken promises made to war heroes, and the government's absurd attempt to solve a complex crisis with machine guns. By the end of this video, you'll understand how thousands of Australia's toughest veterans were brought to their knees by a feathery, marauding army, and why this strange conflict is more than just a historical punchline. Okay, our story really begins at the end of the First World War. Thousands of Australian soldiers returned home as heroes, and in a gesture of gratitude, Australian federal and state governments worked together to create the Soldier Settlement Scheme. The idea was to give these veterans plots of land, mostly in marginal farming areas like Western Australia, so they could build a new life. It was a noble idea, but a flawed one. Many of these men were given poor quality land and were saddled with debts for equipment. Still, they persevered, clearing the tough Australian bush and planting vast fields of wheat. Then, in 1929, the Great Depression hit. The global economy collapsed and the price of wheat plummeted. These veterans, who had survived the horrors of Gallipoli and the Somme, were now facing financial ruin. And as if things weren't bad enough, that's when their new enemy, so to speak, arrived. Every year after their breeding season, about 20,000 emus would migrate from the central regions of Australia towards the coast, and straight into the new irrigated wheat fields of the soldier settlers. To the emus, this was the biggest, most delicious buffet they'd ever seen. They trampled fences, flattened crops, and ate tons of wheat. The farmers were desperate. They were ex-soldiers, they knew how to use guns, but they were simply outnumbered. A delegation of them went to the Minister of Defence, Sir George Pearce, with a strange request. They argued that the birds were a pest, and since they were tough and hard to kill, could the military lend them some machine guns? In a decision that seems baffling today, Sir George agreed. He saw it as good PR, the government visibly helping its struggling war heroes. He authorised the deployment of Major G.P.W. Meredith of the Royal Australian Artillery, 2 soldiers, 1 truck, 2 Lewis machine guns, and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. The war was on. Major Meredith arrived in the district of Campion in early November 1932, full of confidence. This was a man who understood military strategy. How hard could it be to outsmart a bird? Well, he found out pretty quickly. On the first day of the operation, they spotted a flock of about 50 emus. The local settlers attempted to herd the birds into a perfect ambush. The soldiers set up the Lewis gun, took aim, and waited. But the emus were clever. They stayed just out of effective range. After a long wait, the soldiers opened fire anyway. The birds, instead of panicking and running in a predictable pack, instantly scattered in all directions, running with incredible speed. The first volley of machine gun fire was almost completely useless. Later that day, they spotted another small flock. This time, the gun jammed after only a few rounds. The first day's official death toll? Fewer than a dozen emus. Hundreds of rounds had been fired for almost no result. The birds, Meredith noted in his report, seemed to have an uncanny ability to absorb bullets and just keep running. The military needed a new strategy. Meredith decided they needed to be mobile. They mounted one of the Lewis guns onto a truck to chase the emus down. This led to one of the most comical scenes in Australian history. But Major Meredith and his men were recalled in defeat. The press had a field day, and the emus, for now, had won. But the pleas from the farmers didn't stop, and the military, stung by the public humiliation, decided to go back for round 2. Just a few days later, on November 13th, Major Meredith was sent back into the field. This time, the military claimed they had learned their lesson. They would be more aggressive and more strategic. And this second attempt was more successful from a military perspective. They adopted guerrilla tactics, staging smaller ambushes and getting closer before opening fire. The official numbers claim they were killing around 100 emus per week, but the fundamental problem remained the same. There were still thousands of birds, and they were still incredibly difficult to hunt. The army was spending a fortune in ammunition and resources to make a barely noticeable dent in the emu population. By mid-December, Meredith was recalled for good. The final report stated that 986 emus had been killed using 9,860 rounds of ammunition. That's a rate of exactly 10 rounds for every confirmed kill. Even worse, many more birds were wounded and escaped, only to die later. The government finally conceded defeat. The farmers, in the end, were offered a bounty system, which proved to be far more effective. Over a 6-month period in 1934, private hunters claimed over 57,000 emu bounties. So in the end, in some ways, the military had officially lost the war, but the civilians, with a better strategy, had won the peace. All in all, this is a bit of a comical footnote in history, a story that you can tell at the pub or a bar to get a laugh. And on one level, it is that. The image of soldiers being outsmarted by birds is undeniably absurd, but when you look past the punchline, the story becomes much darker. It's not just a failure of military strategy, it was also a brutal state-sanctioned massacre of native wildlife. For me, this story is a perfect, almost tragic example of a government failing to understand a complex problem. The farmers' crisis wasn't just about emus, it was about economics, ecology, and the Great Depression. Sending in the army was a simple theatrical solution, a way to look decisive while avoiding the real issues. It's a powerful and sobering lesson in humility, showing the consequences of trying to impose our will on nature with brute force when the real enemy was a flawed plan. And maybe that's what makes the story so awkward and compelling even today. We can look back at the national embarrassment and the tactical failure and find the dark humor in it. But it's also a reminder that the so-called enemy in this war was an animal that was simply trying to exist, and the outcome, for hundreds of them, was anything but funny. The war was a failure, but the story remains a bizarre and tragic comedy. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe and join the community here at Hoodie History. I explore fascinating stories like this regularly. Let me know what you think. Was this the most absurd military operation in history? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up would be amazing. It really helps the channel reach more people like you. And if you're looking for shorter, punchier stories from history, check out my other channel, Hoodie History Shorts. There's a link here and in the description. Thanks again for watching. Until next time, remember that sometimes the greatest battles aren't won with guns, but with a bit of common sense.